Welcome to The Explainer. Today, we are absolutely going to unpack the intense 45-minute Disney Plus special, The Punisher: One Last Kill. We're breaking down exactly how this compact but incredibly hard-hitting story masterfully escalates. It goes from this place of silent, haunting trauma straight into absolute explosive combat. Honestly, in a media landscape that's just overflowing with these bloated, CGI-heavy superhero spectacles, this particular piece of source material really stands out as a lean, visceral masterpiece. It literally strips away all the superhuman elements to deliver a gritty, completely grounded character study. It's a fascinating masterclass in how to pace a localized action narrative, and we're going to look at exactly how it pulls this off. Okay, so before we really get into the weeds, here's a quick look at our agenda. First, we'll explore the burden of silent trauma. Next up, we'll examine power vacuums and violence. Then we'll break down the pacing and heightened tension. And finally, we'll analyze that high-intensity apartment raid. All right, kicking things off with Section 1, the burden of silent drama and Frank Castle's internal war. So let's look at the very first half of the special, which forces us to sit with a man who is just heavily burdened by extreme PTSD. I mean, before a single punch is even thrown, we are intimately observing Frank Castle literally talking to ghosts in his dilapidated apartment. He's suffering in complete, agonizing silence. The creators are really leaning heavily into the sad, tormented suffering that we've come to associate with Jon Bernthal's phenomenal portrayal of the character. And this iteration, it brilliantly illustrates a man constantly drowning in his own mind. It's a stark contrast to a straight-up, brightly colored, comic-accurate depiction, or, the completely unbothered, straightforward action hero style of an 80s Dolph Lundgren. This version of the Punisher feels the physical and mental weight of every single action he has ever taken. And the story actually spends a significant amount of time making sure we feel that suffocating weight right alongside him. Now, what's so fascinating about this portrayal is how it contrasts with his other, more polished crossover appearances. Think about it for a second. How often do we really get to see the unresolved, ugly side of our favorite action heroes once the mission is supposedly over? When Frank pops up in something like Daredevil, he seems entirely mission-focused. He seems resolved. But this story reveals something really profound. When you see someone casually at an event or just in passing, you don't really know what kind of darkness they're dealing with when they go home. Behind closed doors, Frank is actively wrestling with deep-seated psychological trauma. In fact, it's a pretty surprising detail that while older comic book runs often treated trauma as just a temporary plot device, modern adaptations have pushed really hard to accurately reflect clinical PTSD. They treat his psychological scars as permanent wounds that just never truly heal. Moving right along to Section 2, Power Vacuums and Violence, the Neighborhood's Decay. Okay, so let's connect Frank's internal struggles with what's actually happening outside his window, specifically analyzing the devastating real-world consequences of his past vigilante actions. By taking out a major mob family in the past, Frank inadvertently created a massive power vacuum. Basically, a controlling authority was violently removed and sheer chaos rushed right in to fill the void. As Frank walks through the streets, we're treated to this incredibly gritty, street-level narrative of a neighborhood entirely overrun. We see the direct result of his brutal work: boarded-up storefronts, open gang warfare right on the corners, and daily, unchecked assaults just taking place in broad daylight. The community isn't safer, it's fractured. He removed the organized crime, sure, but he left behind a completely disorganized nightmare. And the story does not let him look away from this chaotic mess of his own making. And this neighborhood chaos, it eventually brings him face to face with a fiercely vengeful mob queen who is literally rising from the ashes of the syndicate he destroyed. She corners him with a chilling realization, stating, "You killed my family, and now this is all going to come down on you." She isn't just some generic mustache-twirling villain, right? She is a grieving relative who has been radicalized by Frank's own bullets. Her motivation is deeply personal, grounded entirely in the bloody legacy he left behind. This interaction brilliantly forces us, the viewers, to critically consider the real-world implications of Frank's brutal brand of justice. It challenges the classic vigilante trope by showing us that every single action has an equal and devastating blowback. Which brings us to a huge, lingering thematic question. Where does the cycle actually end? If taking out criminals only creates a whole new generation of vengeful killers, is the scale of justice ever truly balanced? Take a moment to really think about that. When the crossfire inevitably claims innocent casualties, the collateral damage of a one-man war, the supposed righteousness of the mission begins to rapidly deteriorate. It's a really heavy philosophical conversation the special wants you to have internally every single time Frank pulls a trigger. The narrative literally dares to ask if the Punisher is a cure for the city's sickness or just a different, significantly more lethal symptom of the exact same disease. That brings us to Section 3, Pacing and Heightened Tension, Building Dread Before the Storm. Now, the way the director uses pacing and camera work to transition us away from those broad philosophical debates and straight into localized, visceral terror is an absolute masterclass. The tension is meticulously built during this incredible inciting incident. It starts so normally, with a completely mundane, wide tracking shot of a man simply walking his dog. But then, the camera begins to tighten. A sudden assault begins on the street, but the lens doesn't even give us a clear view. It uses this chaotic, claustrophobic framing to make us feel absolutely trapped in the panic. And then, the mastery truly lies in the visual language of the creeping truck. The director utilizes a static, low-angle shot, allowing the massive grille of the truck to slowly, methodically, drive closer and closer into the frame, completely swallowing the light. It builds pure dread. Finally, it culminates in a tragic off-screen kill of the dog. You don't see the impact, but the sound design, combined with the camera just lingering on Frank's horrified reaction, tells you exactly what happened. By deliberately slowing down the visual narrative like this and focusing so intensely on the impending horror, it creates a suffocating, almost unbearable tension for the audience. It's like the camera is holding its breath, stretching the seconds into minutes. It builds and builds, winding the coil tighter and tighter until it finally violently snaps. That horrifying off-screen moment is the exact catalyst that snaps Frank Castle entirely out of his trauma-induced reluctance. The hesitation evaporates instantly. The slow, brooding atmosphere just completely shatters, launching him and us directly into the kinetic, relentless action that dominates the rest of the runtime. And now for the main event, Section 4, the high-intensity apartment raid and the explosive payoff. All right, this brings us to the highly anticipated second half of the special, where all that quiet psychological tension completely shatters into pure chaotic combat. This 10 to 15-minute raid sequence entirely shifts the tone. It explicitly aligns the brutal intensity of One Last Kill with the absolute best of classic and modern action cinema. You can literally feel the claustrophobic vertical grit reminiscent of the Raid Redemption as he fights floor by floor. You see the tactical, isolated survivalism of the original Die Hard, heavily mixed with the elegant, dual-wielding bullet ballets popularized by classic John Woo films. And of course, it features the incredibly polished, high-octane close-quarters choreography we see in modern Chad Stahelski and John Wick productions. Honestly, if the first half of the special was a masterclass in restraint, the second half is an unapologetic, completely unbridled release of pure adrenaline. And wow, what a phenomenal release it is. Frank systematically clears the apartment building using an absolutely devastating tactical arsenal. We aren't just talking about mindless shooting here. We are watching a highly trained tactician seamlessly transition between weapons. He exhausts his rifle bullets in the stairwell and then immediately switches to close-range shotgun shells to breach the reinforced doors. When the firearms run dry, the sequence seamlessly flows right into brutal close-quarters knife combat in the cramped hallways, ending with meticulously placed explosives to cover his tracks and eliminate the heavily armed reinforcements. It is a wildly entertaining, fast-paced, breathless payoff that action fans are absolutely going to devour. Every movement is calculated, every single strike is lethal, delivering pure, unfiltered entertainment at a breakneck pace. But ultimately, the explainer's source proves that this special truly shines because it understands a completely crucial rule of storytelling. You have to earn the action. In a modern media landscape where audiences are constantly suffering from action fatigue, mindless explosions from minute one just don't register anymore, do they? This special succeeds because it grounds us in genuine, silent trauma and real emotional stakes first. The explosive payoff is incredibly sweet, precisely because those first 20 minutes were so devastatingly bitter. We understand the physical and emotional toll this violence is taking on Frank, and that is exactly what makes the tactical combat feel incredibly impactful, weighty, and entirely justified within the narrative. As we wrap up this explainer today, I really want to leave you with a final, lingering thought to ponder. Based on the many iterations and the brutal cycles of violence we've discussed, from the tormented, grounded realism of Bernthal to the straight-up action-heavy antics of Lundgren, who truly embodies the definitive Frank Castle for you? And what is your absolute favorite piece of Punisher media out there? It's a character with an incredible amount of psychological depth, and One Last Kill certainly adds an intense, really unforgettable new chapter to that dark legacy. Thank you so much for joining me to unpack this incredible special, and I will catch you on the next explainer.